Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. Just like to say that we spent lots and lots of time working towards this conference, so it's really great to be here and actually come into practice. So it's been a great day so far. We've had some wonderful panels, and I'm, as I've said, really pleased to be here. My name is Huma Haq. I am the Evidence and Implementation Lead at the National Centre for Family Hubs, which sits within the Anna Freud Centre. I'm a former teacher and have researched children's social care. Earlier, Josh McAllister mentioned the Social Work in the Schools project and also a DSL project, and that's something that I've worked on, and it's a project that's close to my heart also. So I'll just give the panel a moment to introduce themselves. Tim, if you'd like to begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tim O'Brien. I'm a service manager with Early Help in Kent, so I work for Kent County Council. We are a trailblazer for family hubs, so we're cracking on with it. And my background is in youth work, so I've formerly been a head of youth service in the London Borough, so I'm very interested about how youth work and youth provision will be accommodated within family hubs.
Hello everyone, my name's Emma Rigby and I'm the Chief Executive of the Association for Young People's Health. We're a charity that focuses on young people's health aged 10 to 25 and we work across the UK. Young people are involved in all of our work and we run and design and run engagement and participation work across the UK with young people. But we're also really focused in on improving practice and being an evidence-informed organisation, as well as having a really strong focus on health inequality.
Hi, my name is Naz Siddiqui. I am the Youth Participation Advisor at the National Centre for Family Hubs. So basically what my role involves is using my lived experience of accessing mental health services and advising family hubs on how I think they should be shaped and the considerations they should take when dealing with young people. So yeah, I just bring my youth perspective to the role.
Hi everyone, I'm Carla Goodman. I'm practice lead at LEA London's Innovation and Improvement Alliance. Currently leading on the Your Choice programme, which is from London, CBD-informed approach to working with adolescents. I'm a psychologist by trade with a real interest in working in the sort of adolescent development area, with a real focus on enabling access to services that our young people don't tend to access traditional mainstreams.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Matt Rally. I also work at LEA. LEA is effectively the work programme for London's Directors of Children's Services, so where they look to innovate and share practice and develop work across London. But prior to that, I've spent about 20 years or so working in various services to support and safeguard vulnerable adolescents. In recent times with a particular view to integrating those services, to stop them working so much as services in isolation, but to bring them together to meet the needs of young people in a more integrated and less siloed way.
And I'm Kim Reid. I'm the government sponsor for the panel today from the Home Office. My role is I'm a policy lead, so I'm a civil servant working on tackling child sexual abuse. And I also have a role that's on cross-cutting vulnerability. So there's lots of things that come under the scope of the public safety group in the Home Office, including child sexual abuse and exploitation, serious violence, county lines exploitation, domestic abuse, and modern slavery as well. So there's quite a lot of areas where there's a really strong role for family hubs to play in helping us to tackle those problems from an early intervention perspective, but I'll cover more about that when I speak later.
Lovely. Thank you. So this panel will feel a little bit different to previous panels. We really want to encourage discussion and hear questions from the audience. So this final panel is on integration, young people and participation. We have an impressive set of panellists with a wealth of expertise and knowledge. that I hope they can share with you today. So one point that I wanted to touch upon before we begin the discussion is on the Family Hub model. So compared to previous centres, the Family Hub model covers a larger age range. So we have 0 to 19 years and 0 to 25 years if there are any additional needs. So there is some confusion around this, I feel. So it'd be great today to have a discussion on this and also have a Q&A. So overall, the theme will be exploring how family hubs consider and support the needs of young people's transition to adulthood. We will cover spaces, safeguarding, lived experience, accessibility, SEND, skills and parent engagement. To begin with, we'll have Tim O'Brien, Service Manager from Kent Local Authority and one of our trailblazers, cover child to adult transition and the first 1,001 days in the second decade. So Tim, if I could just hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think what I want to begin with actually is a plea, and that plea is that young people are at the forefront of our thoughts when we are developing family hubs and delivering in family hubs. And when I talk about young people, I mean young people who are in adolescence. So they're young people who are making the transition from being a child to being an adult. And for me, that's the definition of adolescence. And during that transition, they're going through lots and lots of changes, which I'm sure you're all aware of. So physical changes, psychological or emotional changes, and often social changes, and their role within their family, their community, changes, and their responsibilities change. And with that comes a lot of complexity and a lot of vulnerability. And I would argue that anybody who goes through adolescence becomes vulnerable in some way. And then when you add on all the other complexities and vulnerabilities that we know some children face, they are then compounded. So for me, it's a really key time in the life of a child. And we talked a lot today about Sure Start and about Start for Life. And one of the premises for both of those programs is this notion of 1,001 days. When the child is developing in those first 3 years, there's so much development going on, and that leads to complexity and to vulnerability. And what I'd like to argue is that the same could be said of adolescence, that there's a period of time where they're going through so much transition, which is leading to so much development within them, that makes them vulnerable and complex. And so we've talked in our pre-group, in our panel, about the 1,001 days in the second decade and making that the notion for adolescence. And I think that if we truly want to make family hubs 0 to 19, we need to make sure that we are considering the adolescents within that. And if we're thinking in terms of 1,001 days, we'll make sure that we are placing the resources and the services and the provision where it is needed most, notwithstanding the first 1,001 days. But if we truly want to be 0 to 19 as family hubs, I think we need to think also about the 1,001 days in the second decade. And I'm going to leave it there for now, if that's okay.
I think it's over to me now. Thank you, Tim. Well, you'll not be surprised to hear that's coming from a young people's health organisation. I'm going to agree, absolutely, that this is a really important part of the life course. And as Tim has said, you know, in those years that we focus on, from 10 to 25, young people experience huge development, but they also move from being very much, in the still in the family, but being a more independent and accessing services more independently themselves, and the role of peers and other influence in their lives come increasingly important for them. So many transitions are taking place, not in healthcare. When you talk about transition, people often think about a transition from child to adult services, but actually this is a life, part of a life, that, of course, that is, so many transitions are taking place. And it's really important within that we are focusing on what young people need and what they're telling us that they need to be supported. And part of the things that we're concerned about are things like health inequalities and how they are really embedding in adolescence, and how there's really evidence of bad health in adolescence leading to bad health in adulthood. But also that being driven by things like young people being less satisfied with services. There's data around GP services, but others as well, and that's around how they access those services, how they can access them in a way which is appropriate to them, the trust that they have in those services, and the need that they have for confidentiality. And part of that is because we have got this difficult stage where young people are moving a little bit out of the family, and that doesn't mean that those parents and those families don't need support, or those young people don't need support. But we need to think about and be honest about that transition so that we can manage that well. So it's really important that we reach out to them, that we ask young people, rather than just asking young people themselves to step up, and that often is a sort of part of the dialogue that happens. And for us, that's about really taking a very holistic approach and really understanding the context of young people's lives, something which is often quite challenging in a health context where we have quite a siloed approach often in terms of services. So the final thing I was just going to say is that the engaging with young people and participation work with young people is really important, and it's a lot of the things that we do. Assumptions are often made about what young people might like, that they want everything to be digital, or they're going to be really demanding and they're going to ask for unrealistic things. In my experience of running a huge number of engagement events, that is not what happens. That often young people aren't ambitious enough sometimes, and are often very aware of the constraints that the system has and the constraints that the health service, for example, is under. But to do it right, it's skilled work. We need people who understand how to work with young people, and we need to do that in a way which is looks at the safeguarding of engagement work, and also takes a really ethical approach. And if we do it right, we make sure that it informs the governance and the kind of service design of what we do, as well as service delivery. So for us, that's really about, in terms of practicing what we preach, that's about involving young people in all of the things that we do, and making sure that we're working in partnership with community organisations and young people in the training that we deliver, and in the engagement that we do, so that we design it in a way that's really going to work with young people. And then the final thing to say really is that I just enjoy working with young people and alongside young people, so it's a real pleasure to be able to pass on to Naz.
Thank you for that, and I think yourself and Tim for really championing the voice of young people is really greatly appreciated. I'm just going to talk mainly about the impact of participation work on young people. So I myself have had the privilege to take part in a lot of really interesting participation projects, and I use the word privilege because I feel for some young people they might not be aware of what opportunities are out there for them. So I've been really grateful to be directed in the right direction, and have been presented with a lot of really great opportunities. And I've had a really positive experience of participation, and I've come across really good examples of participation. So one that I don't mind sharing with you all today is the work I've done with an independent organisation called Debating Mental Health. So Debating Mental Health, they helped me by training me with debate skills. So they used public speaking skills, and by being trained in public speaking, I've been able to take part in a few public debates, including the first ever youth-led Maudsley debate, where it had the topic was about young people with lived experience, and it was the first ever panel that actually had young people with lived experience doing the debate. So that's something that I'm really proud of, and also speaking at conferences as well. And over time, this participation opportunity really evolved for me because, over time, I got to be trained to co-facilitate the same training that I received when I was younger. So I now have the knowledge to be able to deliver that training for other young people. And yeah, so I think this is just a good example of how good participation work comes in all shapes and sizes, and that creativity is really crucial when creating and providing participation opportunities for young people. And now I'm just going to briefly talk about two different models for participation. So the first model I want to talk about is Roger Hart's ladder of participation, if some of you have heard of it. So this ladder, it basically explores different types of participation, and it's really useful because it also sheds light on some of the more negative types of participation that you should avoid, such as manipulation, decoration, and tokenism. And right at the top of the ladder sits participation work that is youth-led and youth-initiated, but has both involvement of young people as well as adults in decision-making. And this is known as co-production, which is a buzzword I'm sure you've all heard of before. And although this ladder wasn't intended to be used as a hierarchy, in my perspective, I can't help but feel by putting co-production at the top of the ladder that is seen as the pinnacle of good participation work and is something that everyone should strive towards. But I feel like that is not always the case. It's not always accessible, and it's not always an appropriate form of participation for young people. And that if you have a form of participation, and you haven't included young people in the very beginning of the participation work, you might feel discouraged in involving them at a later stage. And now the second model I want to talk about is the Lundy model of participation by Professor Laura Lundy. And this is a really, really excellent model because it's youth-centered. So this model takes into account Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this involves the right for children to express their views and the right for their views to be given due weight. And it involves 4 different elements, and that is space, voice, audience, and influence. So space involves giving the child, basically it's like giving the child the opportunity and platforming them, and whether this is a physical or virtual space. And then voice is quite self-explanatory. It's about allowing the child to express their views and helping them as they are needed. Audience refers to who is hearing that young person, and influence is really important. It's talking about what is the outcome of that young person sharing the views? Like, how do their views make change? What decisions are being made and how we will act upon what they've said? So this is a really excellent module because, like I said, it's youth-centered, and it kind of can work as a blueprint on how you can structure your participation work to be centered around young people. It also works, it's really good for evaluation because it's easily adaptable into a checklist. And this can be used for services to reflect on how effective their service has been, and also for the young person to evaluate how well they believe the participation project has gone. And now finally, I'm just going to briefly talk about one of the components that I mentioned in the Lundy model, which is space. And I just want us to think about, like, when it comes to family hubs, like, what is the physical space that we are providing for young people and how accessible the services are. Because I feel like with adolescents, this is seen as a grey area, and teenagers, they're often left behind and they're not considered. There is a lot of attention towards early years. So when you are designing a space, when you're creating a space, whether it's physical or virtual, and you have a lot of attention towards early years, you also need to consider whether that space is also suitable for young people up until the age of 19 and up until 25 for special needs. Because, like sometimes, a space that is designed for small children might not be also appropriate for older people, and, this might be off-putting for them. You also need to consider where can you reach young people. So, like, when it comes to the promotion of family hubs, are you considering, like, areas that you will find young people in, such as libraries, shopping centres, or clubs? And also thinking about utilizing outreach work. So this might involve, as a family hub worker, if you can reach that young person in a place that they are familiar with, say, for example, school, but of course, approaching it in a discreet way. Yes, that's basically what I have to say about participation work and just bringing my perspective as a young person. I'll now pass on to our next speaker.
Thank you, Naz. That was, really great and links really nicely onto what I wanted to just touch on, I think, just around the thinking about the space. So the project that we work on, Your Choice, we have deliberately chosen sort of adolescent safeguarding as a place to position the project, because we know that there are very, very skilled workers in adolescent services who support young people who don't necessarily access mainstream clinical services, and that there are, building on that workforce where we know that there's some really good work happening. But I just wanted to invite you to think about space, really, and just in Your Choice we talk about, meeting the young person where they feel safe, really familiar with meeting the young person where they are at, and you could think sort of physically, but I think just meeting them at a place where they feel safe is something that is really integral to our programme. And like I say, thinking about the sort of physical space, obviously dealing with teenagers, their risks are very likely to be very different to the younger children who are likely to be accessing the family hub. So thinking about sort of how you do that and how you manage some of those risks. I don't think there's an easy answer to that, but it's definitely something to bear in mind. And also just wanted to, working with teenagers is, for those of you who are familiar with it, which I'm sure most of you are, is not an easy job. It's really tricky, and it impacts on your workforce. What we've found is that when young people get to know that the staff that they're working with, they really build those relationships, that person that's working with them is really invited into the fold, and that includes being invited into their exposure to the traumas, and the impact of that on our workforce is really important and something that we need to be really mindful of. So again, one of the things that we do through Your Choice is about upskilling our practitioners, giving them tools and techniques so that they can use those to support their young people, but they can also use them on themselves. And we also make sure that they have access to clinical supervision so that they have a space to think about some of those exposures, that once they crack it with a young person, they're invited into the fold. They really are exposed to that, and we need to make sure that we have space for them as well to feel physically and psychologically safe in their work.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm going to pick up on one word you said, Carla, which was tricky. So I'm fairly confident that everyone in the room today would recognise the vital importance of bringing adolescents into family hub development, but it isn't easy, and it's not always an automatically easy fit. So I haven't got a huge amount in terms of solutions for you today, but two challenges really, where I think if we can begin to address some of those, then we may in turn find our way working towards some solutions. So the first is around meaningful participation of adolescents. It's one of my privileges at the moment to work on a project across London looking to develop the support offers that are available to London's care leavers. And that is a project that, for the first time, I think, in my career, has been absolutely led at every level and throughout by London's care leavers. They are the voice, they are the leadership of that project, and they, probably as a result of that, are responsible for what are a significant amount of successes from it to date. So I know one of the challenges they would make today is, for those who are developing family hubs, how meaningful is your adolescent participation at every stage of that process? Not the colour of the walls, but the design of those services, which services are in the building, the overall setup within the family hub environment. So that's one challenge that I'd make. The other, which I think also links to participation, is a question about the role of parents in adolescence and how we work with and support parents. Again, a reflection over my career is that I'm not sure we've ever quite got it right with the parents of teenagers. We seem to have sometimes lurched with various trends between overestimating the ability of parents to safeguard and influence their children to possibly a point now where we're in danger of underestimating the role of and ability of their parents in that regard. But again, a challenge I think around family hub development is specifically around how we work and support with the parents of teenagers. Coming from that sort of contextual safeguarding background, I think in many instances where we are unable to reach those children at a particular point in time, and that relationship with the parent, the provision of the right services to that parent becomes absolutely critical. So yeah, I would in any conversation about youth around family hubs, I would strongly encourage us also to be thinking about the parents of those teenagers.
Thanks everyone. It's been really good to hear from everyone. So as the government sponsor, I wanted to set out a bit more of the policy context and things about our funding that might not have otherwise been on your mind, or who knows, maybe they are the forefront of your mind. For example, so to set out the Home Office's role, we obviously have a role in tackling a range of different crimes, both preventing and reducing a range of crimes that mean that we have funding in place that's sometimes in the more specialist support end. I would say majority of our funding tends to be we have funded things in the specialist support end, but that really depends on much more from the universal early help, early intervention perspective as well, to really make sure that we've got a holistic response to preventing crime. So I wanted to talk a bit about the violence reduction units that are another multi-agency structure. I'm sure many of you are already engaging with violence reduction units in your areas. So there's in 20 areas, there in the areas most affected by serious violence, there's additional funding for a strategic approach to preventing and reducing violence. If you are not speaking to violence reduction units, I would really encourage you to. I think relationship building was mentioned earlier, and I think that's a really key thing I'd like to suggest. Also to note in terms of evidence and points where there is good evidence on evidence-based interventions, there's a 200 million fund that's running for 10 years from 2019 called the Youth Endowment Fund, and they have a brilliant toolkit of interventions that shows, for example, things like whole family support, multi-systemic therapy, and it has a good toolkit of how things are evaluated. So the Home Office, as well as the violence reduction units and Youth Endowment Fund, we also have specific funding in certain areas for county lines linked to exploitation, victim services, and there's a Young Women and Girls Fund, as well as specific targeted funding for children affected by domestic abuse, as well as I think we've also got independent child trafficking guardians. We're hoping to roll that out to the whole country. I think there's 2/3 of local authorities who have them at the moment, so would also encourage you to be speaking to those range of one-to-one support for people. In terms of how family hubs can help, I really think that there's so much in terms of signposting to those services when there's more specialist support needed, and can work in really good collaboration with them. So I think, as we've spoken about, also building in lived experience, and there's some resources available on some of the websites, so the Youth Endowment Fund, and there's a Child Sexual Abuse Centre of Expertise that also has some really good resources on it, and that can help really engaging with young people, interacting across the system, and there's some good resources there for parents and carers support, as well as communicating with children. I think, so we've been told before by stakeholders that having a holistic open door can also reduce the stigma of more specialist support. So I think there's an interesting point for family hubs there as well that can help. I think in terms of also why I've joined the panel on
adolescence, we know that that is a really crucial age. We know that people with adverse childhood experiences as well, for example, can be 7 times more likely to become involved in violence. There's key transition points from primary to secondary school, and care leavers, as we've heard about from today as well. We know that care experienced people are disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system, so engaging with youth justice system, people who've had experience of the youth justice system, building that kind of lived experience in on youth advisory panels, which the violence reduction units also have youth advisory panels, so that can really help in terms of the contextual safeguarding, as well as we've talked about extrafamilial harms being really crucial at this age for teenagers, and all of the different influences that there can be on children. We know that as well there's some really good protective factors for children that come out again and again in the evidence, and they are children being in school, engagement in education, and having trusted adults. So there's lots of data that we've got that's showing the importance of that, and I think frequent, regular contact as well. So definitely a role there, and also, of course, frontline professionals playing a role in spotting the signs of abuse and being trained to do that. There's some other resources as well I'd like to point to. So there's Youth Endowment Fund resources. There's also a Tackling Child Disruption Toolkit that the Home Office have published. And there's also the, as I've mentioned, the Child Sexual Abuse Centre has some really good material. There's also a Policing Slavery website for victims of modern slavery. And there's also a national statement that's been published by the Home Office on violence against women and girls as well. There's also some support out there for parents from voluntary sector providers that we fund as well. So Crime Stoppers, Parents Protect website, and also the NSPCC helpline. And in terms of, just more broadly, in terms of, I think we had some discussions here about whether there's a list of key charities, and I would say some of this is not an exclusive list. But Catch-22 are quite involved in they're funded by us on the county line side. Missing People, they're funded by us on the helpline side. And also the Children's Society with a prevention programme working to prevent exploitation. And there's Operation Encompass as well that's been doing some really great work over the years on joining up police data with schools data on domestic abuse. They've got a great website as well. So I think also then to mention that links onto the data sharing side of things, which we haven't mentioned so much, but I've spoken to Lancashire Violence Reduction Unit, who've done some really good work joining up with family hubs locally. They're also sharing some resources on trauma-informed practice. So I just wanted to say a quick word on trauma-informed practice, because there's also some really good projects being funded by the Youth Endowment Fund and the Home Office. They're running via the violence reduction units on trauma-informed training and practice to really get a better sense of evaluating the effectiveness and what the effectiveness can look like. So to keep an eye out for those and work where they are locally. So we're hoping to get a better grasp in future on trauma-informed practice. So I think that was almost all I had to say, really. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'd just like to open it up to the audience, actually, for some questions. Lovely. So we have the lady in the orange. I think a mic's just coming to you.
Hi, I'm Jackie McCormick from Northumberland, and I'll be honest with you, having been seeped in the early years, I am really struggling with how I'm going to do this within the family hubs. I'm really interested in what you said, Tim, about the 1001 days and the second stage, and I'm scribbling away like mad thinking that gives me something to hook some of the thinking around, and I'm wondering whether it's possible to sort of match the work streams against, make them more for that second 1001 days. So where we're talking about parent-infant relationships, start to talk about parent-adolescent relationships. And in my head, I've tried to do a bit of how I can, do that and then translate it into that second stage. So, yeah, really interested to probably hear a bit more about that, Tim.
Okay. For me, I think it's about thinking about that stage as a discrete stage in the life of a person, and recognising that what is needed when working with people in that stage is a specific set of skills and a specific set of principles, and that you consider where they are at the time, because for the first time in their life, for example, and forgive me if I'm telling people what they already know, but for the first time in their life, the family is not the most important relationship. Their peers become the most important. So that's one thing that needs to be recognised, but that's just an example. And I think the key is to recognise that there are a different context, and our colleagues touched on contextual safeguarding and what that means, and how to make sure that young people are safe outside of the family as well as inside the family. So there's elements of that. And I think we've talked a lot about participation and about engagement, and I think that is crucial. And I think we've also got to think about sometimes participation can take over other work, because we want the views of young people, we want them to be involved in helping us to construct the family hubs, for example, and they are service users. We shouldn't forget that we need to provide services for them. And one thing that I would say is that, as well as providing services, we need to ensure that we're doing youth work with them, because there is a difference, and I find sometimes that difference is lost. So providing something like sexual health clinics, condom distribution, for example, is a service, but helping a young person make the transition from being a child to being an adult, that's youth work, when it's underpinned by the principles that we start where young people are, and that's been talked about quite a lot today. They don't work with youth workers because they have to, whereas with social workers they do, for example. With YOS workers they do because they're on orders, etc. We start where they are, whether that is psychologically and emotionally, or whether that is geographically, and that touches on what Naz said about getting the space right, because we have to meet young people where they are, and that's another underpinning principle of youth work. And so detached youth work becomes very important. In Kent, one of the things we're doing, or we're trialling at the moment, is pop-up youth clubs in local venues, because obviously Kent's a massive place. We can't put a family hub on every street corner. So we're going out and we're working with local borough councils, local parish councils, and what they do is they source us a building, they source volunteers, we put a youth worker in, they train the volunteers, they work with the young people, they support that club for a period of time, and we make sure they get proper training, and then eventually we'll start to withdraw, so that it's building community cohesion, it's sustainable as well. So I think the key is that idea that it's a special time in life that needs a special approach and a different approach. And I think it's all encompassing. Things like contextual safeguarding, in particular work with parents, because again, parents find that the tools they've used to work with children, their child, it's not the same when that person is starting to be an adult. They need to find different tools. And again, for me, youth work practitioners are the experts in adolescent development, so they're the ones who are really well placed to be helping parents to understand about the teenage years. So I think it's about recognising that time as a special time and that it needs a special approach. That's it for me.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I was just going to add that I think one of the things is that even us as an organisation that focuses specifically on young people, we are not the experts on all groups of young people. So when I'm running engagement around ethnic minority communities, then I will work with Race Equality Foundation or another community organisation who has those specific skills. When I'm working on, whatever it might be, I'm working a lot on obesity and excess weight at the moment, then we will be working with specialist organisations who can support young people to engage, and then we may run the participation work. So I think that it's really important that there is an approach which, within that challenging context, is joining up with the things that are already there, and services within the statutory youth sector, within the voluntary sector, even though we know that many of, that landscape has been hugely changed, that there are still services out there, and that we need to link up with them. But also in terms of participation, and this has been a conversation that I've had a lot with kind of integrated care boards and partnerships in their infancy, is that we often get a call about, well, we want to set up a youth board and we want to do it tomorrow, and it's going to totally change everything. And I'm like, okay. So we have a conversation where I say, well, okay, so how much time have you got to commit to this? How much budget have you got to commit to it? Do you have the staff to support it? Is there already a youth board in your area? So just kind of thinking about the participation structures, and I think that what Naz was saying about the this hierarchy sense that co-production is the be-all and end-all. A co-production done well, don't get me wrong, is amazing, but something that says it's co-production and in effect is not a co-production is not what we need. So we need to be honest about the engagement that we can do and the skills that we do have to bring to it, and be honest with young people, and deal with what is often scary, is that good engagement work is about sharing power with young people, and that's really, really key. If we're going to do good engagement work, we need to be ready to listen to what they have to say to us and to respond to that. So it's not any good if it's just something which is, a kind of a nice to have, but doesn't actually have an impact. And so that sometimes means that we have to take those engagement structures to the top of organisations, up in the hierarchy. And I'm often supporting young people. At the moment, we have 7 youth board members on the Children and People's Transformation Board at NHS England, and it covers the whole of children's services for the whole of the health system, that's filtering down into all of the ICBs. And that kind of structures at those kind of top levels of organisations, I think, are really important, as well as the stuff that we do at the community level.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions?
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Question again for Tim, really, continuing from the previous conversation. What is it that your youth offer, your youth provision looks like in your family hubs? What is there a practical element to that?
Well, we're only at the beginning of developing family hubs, but in Kent we're a little bit ahead of the game, because we still have youth hubs and we still have a lot of children's centres. And those two elements are managed together under the management structure. So we're already working across the two. Going forward, the idea, I think, is that, as I said earlier, in fact, somebody else mentioned it about getting the space right. And right at the beginning today, I think Claudia was saying about young people say, I don't want to share a building with babies. And I think if we are going to do engagement right and participation right and give power, as Emma said, we need to listen to what young people tell us. And if they tell us they don't want to share buildings with babies, then we need to work out how we provide something for them. One idea that we've got at the moment, we still have 12 youth hubs in Kent. They will become family hubs at some point. But they could be a family hub with a focus on youth, on the youth offer. But also I think in terms of family hubs, we've got to think beyond the building, and we've got to think about the network of support that's around that building and within a given community or a given district. So I think in terms of a youth offer, you've got to be thinking beyond the four walls. I was talking to a youth worker the other day, and they said to me, put me anywhere I can do youth work. because youth work is an action, it's a set of principles, etc. So I think utilising spaces where young people meet, utilising spaces where young people are, and bringing in that contextual safeguarding element, so meeting them on the street, working with them on the streets, also in the famous burger bars that we all love and hate, and working with young people there. We have one of our youth councils that meets in a famous burger bar. We also have, we've recently opened in Maidstone, in the county town, we've opened a provision in a shop front, in a shopping mall. That's in conjunction with the shopping mall as a business, but also with the borough council, with community safety, with VRU, all helping to fund that and to deliver that. So getting it right about, again, an underpinning principle is meeting young people where they are. And if we do that, then we're delivering a good offer. So I think it's about thinking beyond the building and not getting too concerned about that, and using those youth work techniques and tools and meeting young people where they are, whether that be in a school. We do quite a lot of work in schools, but we do a lot of work on a lot of detached work which comes from contextual safeguarding meetings where risk is identified in certain spaces. We do location assessments, and young people are involved in those, so they tell us what's happening in those places. They tell us where they feel safe and where they don't feel safe, and then we can put in services appropriately, and that might be changing lighting or changing bus routes or something like that, but it might be sending detached youth workers to engage with young people as well. And so that partnership approach is again, really crucial. So things like that. So the youth offer's got to be diverse. It's got to be as diverse as the community that you're serving. And I think that is a key theme that's come throughout today. That diversity is really important. So we've got to respond to that diversity. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Hi. So just quickly, adding to what Tim and Emma have been talking about, I think if you are considering how can you better adapt your services to young people and meet the needs of teenagers, I think, and just from my perspective, to put it really simply, is to speak to teenagers and to speak to young people and gain their perspective, because I know it might appear quite daunting, but it's also equally daunting to them, because teenagers and young people, they might think no one wants to hear their opinion, but you can really utilize the use of youth advisory groups or youth forums, kind of the work that Emma's doing, and it really does benefit them a lot, because they would be able to be very vocal about exactly what they want to see from family hubs. So just involving young people and teenagers and making sure that they're not left out, get the information from the source, I guess.
Thank you, Naz. So we'll have a question from the back, and then there's another question, I believe, from Tom at the front.
Hi, I'm Julie Greer. It's really great to hear the passion for working with young people, and to hear particularly, Naz, your talk around participation as well. It's just really, positive to take that on board. Without minimising, I think there can appear to be an unfortunate focus on crime and exploitation in policy development. And I'm just thinking, how can we promote positive adolescent norms within family hub development without, whilst validating those who don't conform, assessing and identifying where this signifies an additional need and where that becomes safeguarding. And I just wonder whether you had some examples of this at all on the panel.
Yeah, it's a lovely point, actually, because one of the things we talk about, like you say, you think about adolescents, you think about teenagers, and it's a bit scary. But for those of us who have the privilege of working with them, will know that it's a golden opportunity. It's an age of opportunity. We know so much more about that developmental stage now than we ever have before. We know that it's a time where their brains are doing lots of stuff, and every interaction we have with them is an opportunity to build. Again, the likelihood is the young people we're working with are likely to have wired their brains slightly different, but there is so much out there now about how you can rewire and how you can do it in this phase. So totally agree with you. The programme that we're delivering is totally flipping on its head. Your Choice is a violence reduction programme. It's targeting those medium to high risk of contextual harm. But yes, we will need to incorporate those conversations around risk, but we are saying let's give that young person an opportunity to really think about the behaviours that they want to be engaging in. Let's give them an opportunity to go out and try new things, so that they, the reality is for those who are in the depths of, really risky behaviours, their networks are building there. And actually for those of you who have worked with teenagers in the thick of it will know that it's a hard bloody job to run a line. It's a really time consuming, it's scary, it probably takes more stress than any of us could ever imagine. And we need to give that other part of themselves that we know exists, we need to give that time to flourish and develop. And so one of the principles is really about taking time to be with those young people in their spaces, giving them time, building that safe relationship so they've got an opportunity to try out new stuff with somebody that they trust. That's really important. But I just totally love the point. It's absolutely, we think of teenagers and we think scary, and the media do nothing to help us with that. But it is also a really great opportunity for them. It's a really important developmental phase. And for those of you that have the privilege of working with them, you are some of the luckiest folk on this planet, because they're awesome, and we need to celebrate that.
Thank you so much, Julie. So I think we'll have our final question from Tom at the front, if that's okay. Oh, should we have a lady just there also?
Just a quick question. It's talking about accessibility and thinking about the current climate that our youths are living in today's world. Have we thought about online spaces, so things like TikTok, Roblox, that prime drink that was a buzz and the kids are going crazy for, and have anybody considered create an online space or an app or whatever that can make it a bit more accessible to the children, to the youths? And if you have thought about that, have you thought about risks and how you've resourced that?
Thank you, Natasha. I still don't know what that prime drink is, but I know it's sold out. Would any of the panelists like to take that question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, there are lots of things out there already digitally, and we run a lot of our engagement work online as well, and do that in a way which is accessible to young people. Don't talk to me about Prime. I have an 11-year-old boy. I've had the obsession, so I don't know how to deal with that one as a parent, let alone in my professional life. But I think. I was with a group of 7 young people this morning talking about digital services in the NHS, and what they were saying was, yes, we can use these platforms, but ask us about what we want from these platforms, because we don't necessarily want all of our health information on TikTok and Instagram. Sometimes we want some of those channels to be for things that we can chill out with and relax, and we don't necessarily want all the information there. So they were saying that a lot of the information that they wanted about their health was on websites, and certainly not on Twitter, because young people are not on Twitter, which was a surprise to some people in the meeting, but they aren't on Twitter, so just to be clear. And so I think if we are going to use digital platforms and apps, we need to make sure that we are checking in with the young people that we want to reach, that is where they are at, and that we kind of channeling the right kind of design. Part of the problem with apps is there is a proliferation sometimes of those apps as well, and that is also a bit of a challenge. So that would be something that I would be thinking about when we're talking about it. It's not to say that it's not possible, but that we just need to check in with the young people that it's going to really work for them.
I think online platforms are really important for young people, and as we develop the Family Hubs account, we're putting quite a lot of resource into our online offer in terms of information advice, but also in terms of delivery of services as well. What we found through the pandemic was that our parenting courses were very well received online, which is something that we continue with. But in terms of engaging young people with online provision, one of the things that I think we need to be aware of is what young people are into. As you say, they're not into Twitter anymore, that's years ago. But developing things like gaming as a tool to engage with young people is probably one of the next big things that I see. And again, some youth workers are starting to do that because you build lots of communities with that, and so you can engage and interact with young people by using gaming. So I think it's you know, like we've all of us spoken about today, is it's about understanding what young people need and how young people are. And you know, they're certainly not how they were years ago, you know, when I was 14, which is a very long time ago. Things have changed dramatically, and the new world is digital, and young people use digital. Interestingly, though, they did tell us that through pandemic, when we was consulting with them about changing to more online service and more digital, they were telling us that although, yeah, that's good, but they still really, really valued the face-to-face interaction with a trusted adult, and I think we need to be aware of that as well.
Okay, I'll just come in for less than a minute on the back of that, but someone's just raised a banner saying time at the back. But I think you've just reminded us, amongst other things, that that the conversation is not just about a building. And just going on a slight tangent from the app question, one of the really quick wins we had when we were doing work on family development in Surrey was just on sharing information, knowledge and awareness between services on two levels, really. Firstly, about what services offered. So it was amazing what could be achieved by really sitting down with early years services and informing them about the structure, the setup, the offer that was available to adolescents, and vice versa, by sitting down with adolescent services and explaining to them what support packages around early years looks like. These two worlds did not know a great deal about each other. So just on that level, people working with families were able to signpost, advise about support, etc., in a way in which they weren't previously. Much better experience for parents with children of different ages. And the ancillary benefit of that really was that the exchange of safeguarding information across those age ranges also improved. So people working with a teenager of concern would suddenly have a greater eye on what the possible impact on the younger sibling might look like. So yeah, thank you for broadening that.
Thank you so much for your questions. I'm afraid we have come to time. We'll now have a short break from 3:40 to 3:50, and we'll have some more exciting talks. Thank you to the panellists. Honestly, all your hard work is amazing.